some people that don't know that I like to start on time. But as people are still logging on, I'll introduce Jenn. Jenn, you're an alumni from UCSD, right?
I am. Go Rebel. Woo.
So you tell me a little bit about your background.
Oh, my background. Well, I don't want to date myself, but I've been at the university for quite a while. I was a student, worked in actually the EVC's office before it became the EVC. It was just the vice chancellor for academic affairs at the time, but then became, senior and then, executive. So I was there as a student worker for about 3 years, worked in the political science office as the AP person and director, and then moved over to OGSR, which is the old graduate and research. When that department separated, I went with the research side and worked for the vice chancellor for research, and then expanded sort of my portfolio to include not just postdocs and visiting scholars, but academic personnel in the research titles, and then PI exceptions and other add-ons. And then from there, I guess in a way, moved back to the graduate side. And now I am the director of the Postdoc Scholar Affairs in the Division of Graduate Education and Postdoctoral Affairs. So we've added the Postdoc Affairs to Graduate division, which is new for all of UC. So we're hoping this is a new trend and that postdocs will be acknowledged in all of the central offices across the UC system. That's about it.
How many different, like the branching off, and then it's in this department. I still call it OGSR, so that dates me, right? I'm like, right? Oh, now it's grad division. I'm like, no, it's GEPA. So,
right, GEPA.
Yeah,
like Guppy.
As my mom, I like to say JEPA. It's called JEPA. I'm like, no, I think they go by GEPA, but anyway. So do you I have some questions, but I thought you have a small PowerPoint, or you want to present?
Yeah, so I did put together a presentation because, as we were talking previously, sometimes it's not clear whether or not fund managers understand the HR side of the house when it comes to postdocs. And so I wanted to sort of present a basic postdoc 101. There's a lot of information, but I'm going to try to run through it quickly, and maybe through that, there'll be more questions. So I'm happy to do it that way. Or if most people know what postdocs are and about the collective bargaining agreement, then I'm happy to just answer questions as well.
So basically, you're free till like 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay. Do you want to share your screen?
Let's see. How's that?
Perfect.
I think if I share it on display, then I lose. Let's see. Let me just share this right. Yeah, I do lose. Hold on. Oh, how's that?
That looks great.
Okay. So I'll go through the postdoc 101, but everyone feel free to ask questions whenever they come up. And I'll try to, talk about some of the nuances. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're talking about postdocs today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about postdocs and general definitions, and then I'll have a slide that talks a little bit about how this impacts training grants. So this is Postdoc 101, the fast-paced version of it. And so what are postdocs? So postdocs by UC definition are individuals who receive a doctoral degree or equivalent. Sometimes it's a foreign equivalent. They are engaged in temporary and defined period of mentored advanced research training to enhance their professional skills, right? So what's important here is that they have a doctoral degree already. They must have it before they start their appointment. We will allow offers of postdoc appointments before they get their doctoral degree, but they can't start their postdoc appointment until they have it, and we need it verified. This is an issue that comes up quite often. They are engaged in temporary and defined period of mentor training. So it's mentored and it's defined. We have a 5-year limit for postdocs. And it's to help them engage and get advanced training in research and hopefully to become academics and researchers, but it can also be in industry and government and other professions. They train under the direction of a faculty member. It could be other researchers as well, like research scientists, even project scientists. But usually it's someone that can financially support their postdoc positions as well as their career development. They are not allowed to be PIs unless it's like a postdoc fellowship or it's a grant that's specific for a postdoc, like the NIH ROO or K99 RO. And effort is 100% time. There are some exceptions for part-time, which I'll mention later, but the idea is that they are here at 100% time engaging in that research training. So UC created this definition about 25 years ago. It's been a while, because there's been different institutions define postdocs slightly differently. And so this was the UCA definition. And then in 2007, NIH and NSF adopted a similar definition. And this is what was adopted also by the National Postdoc Association, which is that a postdoc is an individual who has received a doctoral degree or equivalent and is engaged in a temporary and defined period of mentored advanced training to enhance their professional skills and research independence needed to pursue his or her chosen career path. So very similar to the UC. And this is sort of the standard that most institutions go by now. So at UC, there are 3 types of postdocs. There are the employees, and there's 3 job codes within the employee category. Then there are postdoc fellows. That's 1 job title, and then the postdoc paid directs. So for the NIH NRSAs, they are postdoc fellows, and the job code is 3253. So these are individuals that are funded on a fellowship or a traineeship, so like the NIH training grants. And their stipends are paid through the university, versus a paid direct where their stipends are not paid through the university, but are paid directly to the individual. The vast majority of our postdocs are in the postdoc employee category. So these are individuals that are paid off of a research grant, like an R01. It could be a contract, it could be discretionary funds, it could be startup funds, but they're paid as employees and paid a salary. So that the type of payment is very important because that dictates what title they will go into. So employees are paid a salary, so they are doing work and a service in which we are compensating them for, versus the postdoc fellows and trainees, they are receiving a stipend for which supports them while they're in training. Both a salary and the stipend are considered income and compensation for IRS purposes, but they are different types of monies, and that difference is very important.
But Jen, can I interrupt for 1 second? So to be clear, if you have a postdoc on a training grant, they actually have 2 appointments, correct? They have a stipend, and your postdoc scholar would be their stipend from NIH, and then you have their additional compensation, which would be the employee.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear on everything.
Yeah, I'll go into concurrent appointments.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. You anticipated the next slide. So the other thing to be aware of in the postdoc employees is because there are 3 different titles or job codes, and there is the majority, like I mentioned, are in the 3252 employee because they're engaged in full-time work. There is also 3255, which is non-exempt because they fall under the FSLA salary level. And these are our part-time postdocs. We don't have very many of them. Most UCs don't have any at all. We have anywhere between 2 to 5. Sometimes, we've gone as high as I think 7 or 11 at one point. But there aren't that many. There's maybe just a handful at the university. And this is because they're engaged in, they might have another job off campus somewhere, or they have, child care responsibilities or other things. And so they've reduced their time. And so they are in the NEX title. And then we have the interim. So I've highlighted the interim because this is only used for UC graduate students at their home institution. So if we have a graduate student at UCSD and they're graduating, but they haven't finished their graduate work yet. And so the PI wants to, pay them for another 3 months or so that they can finish their research. And then they'll most likely be leaving UCSD. This is when the interim title can be used. So it's not for another UC student coming to San Diego. And it's not for, anyone else outside of the UC system coming to UCSD for a short period of time. These are for UCSD graduate students who are working on their graduate research just to finish because they can't be graduate students anymore. So you can hire them as an interim postdoc for, usually 3 months, sometimes 6 months, and then they leave. If at some point the PI decides, hey, you know what, why don't you stay as a postdoc? They can convert them into a 30 to 52 title. That is allowed. But so I want to be specific on how that interim title is used. Okay, some key points. So this is sort of the rapid fire things to know about. So key points about postdocs is 1, they're represented by the United Auto Workers. They've been represented for, honestly, like 15 years now. So we have a lot of history about this. The UAW now represents the GSRs, and so these are the pre-docs, and so it's made life a lot more complicated. Their initial appointments now have to be for 2 years. So the contract requires all postdocs to for their initial appointments to be 2 years, which complicates matters quite a bit for especially those on fellowships. That might be less than 2 years. The initial hire date is crucial for salary increases, and I'll go into that on the next slide. There's a 5-year eligibility limit. I know NIH allows only 3 years of funding as a postdoc from NIH NRSA program. But as a postdoc, the individual can be a postdoc for up to 5 years. We do have an exception for a 6th year, but that is an exception. So we ask, please do not ask for that exception. It's 5 years. The PI should be preparing the individual to move on to their academic or, industry or government careers, and by the end of their 5th year, or no later than their 5th year. A lot of times postdocs only do 3 years, right? 2 years, 3 years, and then move on. And so the goal is not to keep them for 5 years. It's to get them prepared and move on to the next, stage of their career. So there is that 5-year limit. All postdocs are entered into UC Path, and this has been going on for at UCSD, at least for back in the old PPS days as well. But they are in UC Path, and whether or not they are actually paid through UC Path. They all have access to benefits. They may waive the UC benefits, but they all have access to it. They have, most postdoc fellows and trainees have concurrent appointments because the fellowships don't pay enough, and because the contract requires that the postdocs are paid a minimum amount. Most fellowships have to be supplemented, and in order to supplement that and bring them up to the required levels, they are given a postdoc employee appointment. So they will have a fellow appointment as their primary and their employee appointment as sort of their secondary or supplemental. And this makes PPS entry very complicated. They are normally 100% time, as I mentioned, but they can be reduced if they have other responsibilities like childcare or other jobs. They are considered academics and they are not students. Oftentimes people will refer to postdoc as students. They'll say postdoc students, or, students. They're not. They've graduated, they have their doctorate degree, and so they should be considered as early career researchers. And postdocs, again, because of the way they're paid, there are different tax implications. And so for postdoc employees, like all employees, the universities withhold taxes for federal and state, or if they have a visa, it depends on their visa. For postdocs on stipends, we do not withhold their taxes, right? Their money is considered taxable income, so therefore they must report their taxes to the IRS, but the university does not withhold taxes on their behalf because they are not employees. Let's see. And so something else to be aware of is that their benefits that is paid on their benefits premiums that are paid on their behalf, that for training grants are paid by the training grant, that's considered imputed income, right? So that's tacked on to their overall compensation and considered income. Okay. So some training grant issues. The biggest issue is managing the new stipend rates based on the new contract that was just ratified in December. This has gotten very complicated, and I'll go through this example in the next slide. The other issue that comes up often is not timely entering the job changes. So as I mentioned, there are tax implications depending on if they're an employee or a non-employee. And so if you have someone that was a postdoc employee, then they are put into a training grant slot and not changed in a timely manner, then there's a lot of retroactivity because taxes were withheld when they were a postdoc employee, but when they switch to a postdoc fellow, they are not withheld. So there's a lot of cleanup that has to go on, and it gets even more complicated when it crosses tax years. And so it's important that if you know someone's going to be put into a training grant, that change is entered into path on a within the payroll period, ideally. Other actions to be aware of is the benefits eligibility. And so, as I mentioned, about benefit premiums being considered imputed income, something that has happened recently is the way that postdocs become eligible for the different benefits programs. So when they're a postdoc, they have their own postdoc benefits program that includes health, vision, dental, life, accident, death, and dismemberment, etc. Now, if you have a trainee or any postdoc that then decides, hey, you know what, I want to become a faculty member, I want experience teaching, I'm going to accept a lecturer position. If that lecturer position is more than the postdoc position, so like say lecturers are, can be 33%, but then it could be up to like 67% if they're teaching like 2 courses. That switches them into an employee benefits, because now sort of the more generous benefit is the staff and employee. So if you have a situation like that, then it will impact the funding source. So just be aware of that. And also we've learned recently that if this benefit change or this benefit happens, or if the eligibility for the benefits happens, let's see, how do I phrase it? If the benefits eligibility happens, and the individual may or may not be notified that that's happened, they may then lose their PIE period, right? Which is the period of initial eligibility to sign up for the benefits. So they may lose that because UC Path system will look at and go, oh, this person's eligible the time that you've entered that appointment and not the start date of the appointment itself. I hope that makes sense. And so it's a glitch. Well, I shouldn't say it's a glitch. It's how the GIRs work. So the group insurance regulations. And so we've learned that that's happened recently with a few postdocs. There are some differences in leave benefits. So the NIH has recently or not, the NIH has changed their parental leave benefits, but now the UC benefits for parental leave is more generous. And so this will impact individuals who choose to go on maternal leave and then use their parental leave. And this will require some funding from the mentor to cover the difference. Let's see. And then a question that comes up often is whether or not postdocs are on training grants are eligible for additional compensation. And the answer is yes, by exception. Because the idea for NIH is that they're in full-time training. But they do understand that there are situations where the trainee may want to engage in other activities that enhance their training. So like teaching, right? And so if you have someone on a training grant, but then they want to go teach, a summer session course or teach, as a lecturer for a quarter, we do allow that. And then there are times when there are clinical trainees that want to engage in some clinical activities to keep up their medical, licenses. We allow that as well. And so I can ask, and if you have more questions on that, I can try to answer them.
Yeah, this is kind of a sticking point for a lot of, well, because it's coming up also with the pre-docs too. But like the NRSA, I'm pretty sure says additional employment, or like how are we supplementing someone's compensation in both their fellow, because they have the fellow right title and then they also have the employee title for those that are on a training grant. How is that allowed?
So there are multiple policies and issues that you sort of have to separate out, right? So, and first, we have the UC policy, we have UC academic policy, we have the collective bargaining agreement, and then we have the NIH policy. So first we'll look at the NIH policy, which is that, yes, you can compensate them, right, for this additional work, right? As long as it doesn't prolong their training or detract from their training, right? So how that translates is, what we ask is if the PI and the mentor agrees that that it fits within the NIH requirements, then we will usually allow it, right? So again,
no, I'm talking about the supplement.
Right, so I understand. So I wanted to
okay.
make sure you all understand sort of what NIH allowed and how we then put it into practice, right? So then the other part is the supplementation to meet the minimum of the collective bargaining agreement rate, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the training grant funding that's on a fellowship title, right? And then you have the supplement for the employee portion of it to bring them up to that minimum rate. And that supplementation will have an effort, right? Usually it's a small amount right now, point something, 0.1, 0.2, sometimes it can be higher. Now, if you have an individual who then wants to work for another PI, for a quarter, because they have a certain expertise and they can help provide that expertise to their research project, we will allow it up to 20 to 25%, right? So that's additional compensation. So basically this person can have 3 different job titles, right? You have the fellow, you have the postdoc employee that's supplementing that fellowship, and then you have another job, hopefully working for a different PI that is additional compensation.
But does the supplementation, right, that carries effort, mm-hmm. how is that allowed according to NIH policy?
It's additional compensation. It can be, postdoc can have an additional job, but they do allow that. The university, we don't allow more than the 20 to 25%. We don't.
So as long as the supplementation is under 25%, then it's okay.
Right, if it's enhancing their postdoctoral training.
So Lindsay, I think also to make sure we're clear, so you have 2 verbiages here: additional compensation and supplementation.
Yes.
So we are saying, yes, we're supplementing them up to that UAW salary cap, or the salary, whatever the word is. Sorry.
Requirement, whatever.
Salary level, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they have to be a certain amount. We know NIH isn't going to give them that much. And so they already know that we're going to have to give them a supplementation, but that is really additional compensation. That's one form of additional compensation.
And
Is that-
how, yeah. And how are we guaranteeing that the training that they're doing is different and distinct from the quote unquote additional compensation, really kind of supplementation?
Yeah, so that, I mean, and the NIH policy says, like, very explicitly, like, you can't pay it from a fund source that supports the same research as the training grant. So now so some people interpret this as you have to pay from a discretionary fund source, a non-federal fund source. But I've had PIs will say, well, I'm going to pay it for my R1 because it doesn't support the same research. And it's one of those interpretation things on that. Did that answer your question?
It does. I just find this very wishy-washy across all of this.
It can be kind
Well,
of taxing on the
it
brain.
shouldn't be wishy-washy, right? Because because the goal is clear and the policies are clear in that what NIH allows and gives the university some discretion, right? So it does allow the university to provide additional compensation to the trainees. So that's what that supplementation part is for, right? Because we have a collective bargaining agreement that says we have to pay this individual a certain amount of money, right? And so we can supplement that from like a fund source, right? That allows it to bring them up to that amount. So that's additional compensation. It's for the same work. It's for them to be in training. But if you have a situation where now a different PI wants to hire the same postdoc fellow, specifically a fellow on a training grant for different work, they can do that as well, up to 20 to 25%. And I say 20 to 25% because, 8 hours versus and 10 hours. It depends, right? So sometimes it might be an 8 hour, it might be a 10-hour equivalent. And so, in a quarter, it might be 25%, but over a year, it'll only be 20%, right? Something like that. So that's why we give that slight range. But the goal is, whatever the work is, it should not be detracting from that postdoc trainees training program, right? It has to enhance it. So, if the postdoc's teaching, that's an enhancement toward their teaching, faculty career goals. But if you're asking the postdoc, to do something that's totally different and that makes no sense, then we would not allow that additional job. I hope that's clear. Holly, comment or question?
Yeah, well, it's actually a clarifying point, I guess, because I see this confusion with PIs all the time. And the primary issue is that for reasons that I guess can be attributed to a lack of understanding of compensation laws and rules, the PIs will often propose, okay, so what we'll do in order to make that supplementation so that they hit the UAW level is we'll give them another job and they'll work, this other job as well. And I always say, no, that's moonlighting and that is not supplementation. They can only work their, 40 hours or whatever their heart's desire during the week on research. Any additional hours, which are a different job, that would be moonlighting. And that's what the NIH requires to be at 20% of their total effort. They can't work more than a maximum of, 8 to 10 hours a week, although they can average it out throughout the year. But the clarifying point is that the effort has to be 100% given to the research, the training and research that is connected to their NIH stipend. And that amount, whatever their compensation is required, that their additional supplementation for the UAW to meet the UAW level, that has to come from a place not in return for additional work. Does that help?
It helps, right? Like distinguishing between what, additional compensation is versus supplementation. But the policy that I just linked for NIH says recipients may supplement stipends from non-federal funds, provided the supplementation is without any additional obligation for the trainee. So having an additional employment isn't that an additional obligation because it
Okay,
carries with it
so
effort?
that goes back to the supplementation and in the policy statement that you're looking at. The 11.3.10.1 is talking about supplementation, and then the next paragraph is compensation. So what Jen and I and Holly are talking about right now is falls under compensation.
Extra hours. So the way that I differentiate for PIs and, across the university, across divisions, across departments, everyone's using different words and different language to define the same thing. And so I try to stick to the NIH definitions, and I refer to supplementation as that amount that goes up to the pay level required by UAW. That's supplementation. Anything beyond that is compensation and can have additional hours of work. So the compensation part can come from whatever funds the PIs are free to use for things they want to use. And the supplementation part has to come from, a non-discretionary fund or, division funds or department funds or some other type of money source that is not committing them to
Effort.
But I think what the point that Jill is making, and that the policy following the one you highlighted refers to, Jill, I might be walking off the end of the dock here, but I think that Lindsay's concern, because I've had the same concern, is
Yep.
yeah, the difference, if it comes from funds that a PI is free to use as he wishes, and I guess, or she wishes, I guess, that would be the PI who says, I want to use my separate R01 funding, which I can do whatever I want with, as what's the term for, I've lost it. What's the term for standard procedure, common procedure across the university?
SOP?
No. It's your general grant practice, whatever your grant standards or grant practice is. The UCSD has across the board generally accepted that using, like an R01 that the PI is allowed to do whatever they wish to do with, as long as it's separate from the trainees' research and does not require them to do any extra work, then it's okay for them to provide whatever funds they're able to provide, because the rules around that particular type of federal funding has already said that the PI can use it in whatever way they see fit, which advances their research, their lab, whatever.
Yeah, but still federal funds.
Yeah, go ahead, Jill.
Okay, no, so the compensation part, if you read that closely, it says they are allowable charges to a federal grant, except, you have to make sure it doesn't support the same research. So you can do it for compensation, you can't do it for supplementation.
Right. So all of our postdoc employee positions, how are we ensuring that the piece they're doing for training and the piece that they're doing for compensation are different? Is there like a form that people fill out, or that like we just go on the PI's word?
So for pre-docs, yeah, there is a form. I believe they still use this form, and there is a form that we fill out and say, okay, this does not conflict or whatever. I haven't filled this form out in years, so there is no form for postdocs. We're all on the word of the faculty member. If that's still correct, Jen can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. We don't have a different form that acknowledges. We assume that happens during, when they submit their renewals, our PPRs, all that, right? Where they have to sort of vouch for how they use their funds. We don't manage that or oversee it.
So I like to get it in writing from my PI. I'll respond to them as a fund manager and say, we're going to use such and such, grant. Does this conflict? And they can, just please respond yes or no. And if they respond no, then I have my documentation. I've got my, cover CYA info from me. But yeah, there's no, no one from Jen's office is going to be checking on that. that, I said, maybe we should move on, but I hope we answered your questions, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I think it's an important topic, and I know that it's coming up a lot on the graduate side now that the graduate students are unionized and there are certain effort requirements, and it's changing the campus practice for how we fund and what we can require, graduate students to do and how much we can fund. And so I think there will be more guidance, at least on the graduate side, on the appropriate funding sources to cover the supplementation portion. Does that make sense?
Can I ask one more question? I'm sorry to harp on this.
Right.
I'm going to move on. So if you do have an additional 25% compensation, that means your FTE is going to be over 100% with the university?
No,
Is that-
there's an FTE for the training grant portion.
Okay, so it is kind of still bundled into a single 100% appointment.
The supplementation is, but you can have additional compensation for a different job. Is that what you're talking about? Or
Right, correct. Yep.
So in, UC Path, it'll look like the person has 100% fellowship, say a 0.5% supplementation, and then possibly a 20% additional comp job. And that's
Got
what.
What? For all the postdocs I've always seen is like 80% on their on the training, and then 20% on their, so 80% on their fellow position, 20% on their employee position as far as an FTE goes.
Yeah, you could have to back into it in UC Path. That is right.
Right. So they don't have 3 different things. They actually only really have 2 in UC Path.
Well, in this particular case, it's the training grant, the supplementation, and then an additional comp job. So there are 3, but in most cases, it's the fellowship, the training grant piece, and then the supplementation. So there's 2.
Yeah.
Total
Okay,
100%.
sorry, we keep muddling up supplementation versus compensation, and it's getting me very confused, because what you're referring to is actually every single time we're talking about quote unquote supplementation, it's actually compensation.
It shouldn't be compensation, it should be supplementating the training grant
To get them up to the
hard level. That's correct.
level. That is that, but yet we're paying them
it
using
is.
employees.
I understand your confusion, Lindsay, because if you look at the NIH policy, it's just different verbiage than what we say.
Right.
I refer to say, okay, you have your NIH appointment, which is your scholarly appointment, and then you have an additional compensation appointment to get you up to the UAW,
Right.
So
Which
that's
is what-
kind of goes in sync with the NIH language. But then there's also, they could also do an extra 25%, if I'm understanding this correctly, or up to 25% for something else besides just the gap. Is that what I'm understanding, Jen?
Yeah, so I guess we're using different verbiage, as Holly mentioned. And so what I'm saying is that because the NIH provides a certain amount the contract requires a certain extra amount to bring them up to the level, we consider that a supplementation. That's the UC language for how we supplement the postdoc to bring them up to the required minimum rate.
Which in NIH's eyes would be compensation, additional compensation.
Right, and that's what Jill is saying, yes.
Great. Okay.
So there's a question in the chat, Jen, where it just went away. So it says, so I can work full-time and part-time at 25% plus the compensation percentage?
No. The somebody in that position can work whatever their percent of effort is, their percent of effort on the training grant plus their percent of effort for the supplementation is 100%, and that is their training grant work. They can then also work up to an additional 25% or up to 10 hours per week on the other position. Their moonlighting, their other, that would be, that's a separate job. The first 2 positions together are the one job. That's the training grant appointment. The third one would be their bonus job.
Oh, I hope I answered the question. Okay. Well, did I, is it Shana? Did that answer your question? I don't know if she's still on. Anyway, Jen, let's go ahead and move forward and we can always, oh, she did. Okay, it did.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. So what I wanted to sort of focus on is the stipend changes. And so for those that are on training grants, this is going to be a lot more complicated because the new contract requires that postdocs receive their salary increases not when they're reappointed, but either in April or October of each year. And so depending on when the postdoc was initially appointed, that will then determine whether or not they have an April salary increase date or an October salary increase date. This is problematic with the NIH because, you know, NIH increases their stipend levels. You never know when it's going to happen, but it's usually retroactive to October, and it's only good for that budget year, right? And so I want to kind of share a scenario that that you'll have to be aware of. And so here's a scenario where the postdoc was appointed September 1st of 2023, and the new contract requires a 2-year initial appointment. So this will end in 2025 at level 0, which the current UC level 0 rate is $60,000. So that's a $5,000 a month rate. The NIH NRSA training grant provides $56,484 for level 0, right? So there's a difference in $293. That's what I call supplement, that you guys are calling compensation, right? That you have to give the postdoc fellow an employee title, postdoc employee title, in order to pay that supplement. Okay, that's just to bring them up to the minimum amount. Now, because this person was hired in September, on October 1st, there'll be a range adjustment for all the postdocs. The level 0 rate will be increased to $64,480. So this person's salary is going to be range adjusted to $64,480 on October 1st. Now the mentor has to provide more of a supplement of $666.33. So that has to be changed in UC PATH. Okay, so whatever the fund source is that you're paying this from. But then on April 1st, because the person was appointed in September, they're on the April cycle. So on April 1st, they're eligible to be advanced to step 1. It's not a year yet, but the person will be advanced to the UC level 1 rate of $66,868. So now the mentor has to provide the difference of $865.33. On September 1st, that's their anniversary date. NIH might have provided the second year, right, funding. So this person is now advanced to the NIH, or will receive an NIH funding at level 1 on September 1st of 2024. And that amount currently is $56,880. So now the supplement can decrease to $832.43. So there are multiple salary rate changes that will have to be entered into UC PATH. And that's sort of the point I was trying to make with this scenario. So it makes it a little bit more complicated because previously, you know, you changed it when the NIH provided additional funding, and then when the postdoc reached their anniversary date. Now it's range adjusted, and they have an April date, and now they have an NIH date. Does this make sense? I hope.
this
My
makes sense.
brain really hurts after that, Jen. Really hurts.
Is
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm like, wait,
my
what?
our HR people are real not ecstatic about it, but like, is there anybody who's working with UCPath and GEPA or on the reporting team in order to get some sort of automated reporting? So be like, hey, these people need to be changed. These people need to be changed. You know what I mean? Like something, because we're all going to face this, and this is just going to be a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, we are working on some reporting in our SAS. In terms of in the business activities hub, we don't really have a way. Well, there is a postdoc monitoring report. I think that can help with some of this. Now, for the range adjustments and advancement dates, we are working on a report for those. And right now, as we're preparing for the October range adjustments, Jenny is reaching out to the department contacts to review everyone that's on a training grant and fellowship. Anyone that has a concurrent appointment or off scale, we'll have to review all of them to make sure that we understand, what all the changes are, make sure it's correct so that we can do sort of a mass upload. But I think this time around, I think OP said that we'll have to manually do them on the campus. But anyway, we are working on this report now, and we'll be in touch with the departments probably next week. We just got the initial report from OP on everyone that's impacted to review the list. And we have the largest population of postdocs. And most of our fellows all have concurrent appointments, so you can understand how complicated the review is. So we're looking at all that list now. The official list will then come out. Actually, we're looking at the list now to look at certain missing data. Then next week, we'll get an official list and then work on correcting some of these issues. And then we'll have another report of what the changes should be. So we're doing a lot of that internally, but then all of the concurrent appointments, we will be reaching out to departments because they will require manual entry to UCPath. Hope that makes sense. This is our first range adjustment for postdocs. And so once we go through it this year, hopefully it'll be a lot easier next year. But I'm not sure how much the process itself will change since we have some existing limitations.
So Katie put in the chat this question, and did that get answered for you and Lindsay? How can you tell again which cycle each postdoc is on for their range adjustment, April or October?
We have a chart which we can share, or I'll add it to this presentation and then you can send it out.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. I think most of you work with ARC, and so ARC is obviously aware of all of this and plan according. And then if you have access to our SAS system, when they're entered into our SAS, we do separate them out by when their conversations change, and so it should be out there as well.
Well, thank you, Jen.
Let's see, that might be the last. Oh, this is just a reference for in terms of planning ahead. So this is unique for UCOP to have given us the salary increases for the 5 years of the contract or 4 years of the contract. And so you can plan ahead to see what the increases, the UC required minimums will be, and then what the current NIH and RSA levels are, and see the difference. And so you plan ahead in terms of budgeting.
So is this published, Jen, or did they just give you, is this published now on your website?
It is not published. They have asked us not to publish it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Public facing website, but we can share it with, within the campus. So it's not any secret how much it is, because it is, the terms are in the contract that these are the increases.
But you kind of have to like dig in the contract to find it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not outlined like this, it just says, it'll be a 3% or 3.5%, that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
And they were leveling, but I think for the April 1st and October 1st, there's a lot of leveling that had to happen so that there was a standard sort of a difference between the steps. So after the October 1st scale, it's leveled, and now it should be about the same now going forward in terms of differences between the steps. So this October 1st salary scale, it might be a huge jump for those, I think, at the lower levels. So your I think it's like a 7-point-something% increase from the previous scale.
So can you tell me, like, as a research administrator managing postdocs, you said there's going to be a range adjustment. Is that automatic? What does the average like fund manager on this call need to know about that? What do they
Yeah,
do?
so what's gonna happen is, so the OP has pulled a report of all the postdocs in UC Path that have active appointments or on a break. I don't think we have anyone that's on like a short work break, I think is what the term that they use. But usually we don't use that term for postdocs. But anyway, so everyone that's active in UC Path now, they will look at the level. In UC Path, they call it a grade, but it's basically the level. And then the rate, and they have a formula to calculate how much of a range adjustment or what the range adjustment will be as of October 1st, right? So we get that report. The majority are on scale, so we'll be able to compare, does the grade, the rate match? And then if so, is the proposed amount correct? That's what we're looking at. Some postdocs are off scale. And so we'll have to determine, if that off scale, if they are on off scale, and again, if that calculation is correct. And then if not, we will have to calculate it. For those that have concurrent appointments, we will also be looking at those the same way. Is the grade correct? Is their appointment dates correct? Is the rate correct? Is the new calculated proposed amount correct? Then what we will be doing is going back to the department contacts and asking, they're on a standard rate. This is the calculated amount. How do you want to distribute where the charges are, right? Because now you'll have to adjust the percentage of what is charged to the employee part and what is charged to the postdoc fellow part, right? And that's what the departments will have to recalculate. We have an Excel spreadsheet where you could plug in the numbers and it will kind of spit out what the calculations will be for both the positions. And that will be shared with the department contacts.
And this is all kind of really coming down next month, right? I mean, by next month's deadline.
Through September, we'll be working on that for the department responses. And then we will pass that on to UC Path, and they will do the mass uploads for the standard employees that basically just have one employee appointment, because that's fairly straightforward calculation. Then we will do a mass upload for them. For those on training grants that are split funded, these will be manual entries because you have to enter changes on the overall percentage, and then the percentage for each position job, and those you have to enter manually.
That was my next question, so perfect. Thank you. We only have like about 6 minutes left. Do you have more questions?
No, I think that was it for me, and then just our contact.
So do you have a listserv?
We do. If you want to be on the administrator listserv, you can send an email to Jenny Solomon at opsa.ucsd.edu, and she can add you to the listserv.
Okay, I know I'm going to be doing that right now because I'm not on your listserv. Is there any? I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, but is there anybody that on the call wanted to ask a question specifically to Jenn right now before I ask mine? Well, maybe I'll take that as a no. Okay, so Jen, one thing that came up with one of my training grants the other day was the tax implication. And who is responsible for giving the postdoc like appointment letter to the postdoc for the training grant? Is it the coordinator? Is it your office? And who gets to notify the trainee about their change of status with their taxes?
Just ask, I don't think that would be a department administrator.
Okay, that's what I assumed, that's what I figured, like, so say whoever's appointing them to the training grant, that coordinator would say, okay, here's your appointment letter under the training grant, and to be, you've been paid as an employee for X amount of, months or years, now you're gonna be paid majority of a stipend without taxes. So the reason why that came up is because they couldn't decide who was supposed to tell the trainee and provide this information. So I just
I mean, it differs by department, but this is part of sort of the, onboarding, right, function. And so we would say the department administrator would be responsible. What our office does is process a request for the appointment itself, right? And so we will then put the offer letter together and give it to the department administrator who had submitted the request, and then they give that offer letter to, the trainee. So now the training grant piece of it, but each department, it might differ. It might be whoever does onboarding, it might be the training grant administrator, right? But definitely someone should mention that, it's a postdoc.
For me, I just wanted to make sure it's clear that that's not going to come from your office. It's going to come from the coordinator, the department level.
Right.
Okay. So another question I have, which always seems to boggle my mind as a health sciences person. So there, you talk about clinical postdocs and postdoc researchers. Can you, like, in a high level, because we don't have a whole lot of time, tell me what the difference is?
I will try my best. So basically, any medical resident that's on a training program, right, that's going towards the certification of their medical profession, and they're put on a training grant, right, to do the research component of their overall clinical training, they stay on the medical resident side. They're not postdocs. We don't consider them postdocs for UC purposes. They are medical trainees, right? But that's not to say sometimes they might take a leave from that clinical training to do an actual postdoc. In that case, they can and are often appointed as a postdoc and funded on a training grant.
So yeah, I mean, because there's like Office of Graduate Medical Education, which deals with those postdoc, I'm sorry, the residency programs, and then there's the postdoc researchers, what I always say, and then I point over this direction, I go, that's Jen over there, main campus, and then you've got graduate medical education over here. And so I know it can be confusing, at least everything on the health science side is confusing anyway, right? But
I just look at it as their primary goal, the clinical side or the research side. If it's clinical, it's over in graduate medical education.
And then you have the occasional ones that are like, okay, we're going to go off of our residency and we're going to become a postdoc researcher. And that's when I call you, because I'm like, I don't know what to do, but Jen will know.
Exactly.
No pressure whatsoever.
Well, we work closely with Cindy Slaughter on that. So
is there any other questions? I know we're at the top of the hour. I don't know what this little noise is. Is that me?
That's my phone. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Glenn's calling you.
Right.
Anyway, I'll stay on for a couple more questions. Otherwise, we'll conclude this segment. If you guys have more questions, always feel free to email me and I can pass them along to Jen. But I will be posting this recording on the website and the slides from Jen. Thank you, Jen.
Good.
I hope your brain doesn't hurt too much now.
Oh, no, now we have to deal with the range adjustments.
I know.
That's what's gonna hurt.
But yet it gets better. Hi, Corey. She's all being shy.
I saw you stick up that training.ucsd.edu website.
Oh, yeah, that actually you created that site, didn't you?
Yeah. I'm glad it's being used.
Oh, we do use it. Yeah.